In this video, we're going to talk about Dynamesh and how you can sculpt creatures and characters starting from a Dynamesh base. Dynamesh is different from subdivision models in that you can dynamically remesh as you're working. So you don't have to worry about the volume of your original model. You can just keep dynamically increasing your resolution as you sculpt as it's needed. So we're going to create this creature bust here using Dynamesh. So let's go ahead and get started and see how this works. My favorite way to start design in ZBrush is to just use Dynamesh. And I'll do that by going to the Lightbox and going to the Tool menu. And here you'll find a polysphere. Now, I treat the polysphere like a digital ball of clay. I'll just double-click that, and it becomes my active Z tool over here in the right-hand side under the tool palette. So I can now draw that onto the canvas and then press the T key to go into edit mode. Now, of course, I can rotate around and start sculpting on this. I'll turn on X symmetry to start with and zoom out. And the first thing I want to do is just select the move brush and just start shaping this into some kind of form. So the best way to do that is to just start with kind of an egg shape from the front. Then I'll rotate over to the side view, snapping to a side view. You can click this head here to navigate, but I still use the hotkeys for navigation, which are Alt, click and drag to move, click and drag to rotate. And then if I want to snap to that side view, I just click and drag to start rotating, and then press and hold the Shift key as I get close to the view that I want to snap to. So if I start rotating towards the side, then press and hold Shift, it'll snap to the side. Let go of the tablet pen first, then let go of Shift. If you let go of Shift first, this is what happens. I start to rotate towards the side and press Shift. Then if I let go, it just bounces back to where it was. If I let go of the pen first, then it stays locked into that side view. So I'll just start giving it some cranial mass here and snap back to a front view. And I'm basically just roughing in some kind of form here. I think I want there to be a bit of an underbite, so I'm going to pull what will eventually be the jaw forward and start to suggest sort of the occipital mass of the skull here, or the underside of the skull, bring the occipital out. And I'm just roughing in the shape from the side view. Now I'll snap to the top view, and you can see it's tapered. So I want to actually bring out the cranial mass here and give it some kind of shape. And already I get this sort of happy accident as I'm moving stuff around. That's an interesting shape that perhaps I'll keep. Now I'm going to start using some brushes to sculpt on this. And this is not a Dynamesh yet. This is still a regular tool that has multiple subdivision levels. And that's fine. We're not ready quite yet to Dynamesh. So I'm going to select the Clay Tubes brush, B for brush, C for clay, and Clay Tubes is right here. It's the T hotkey. So I will take the Clay Tubes brush and I'll turn my draw size down. And this is just a nice brush for sketching because it gives you this noisy kind of surface. It's very much alive and it doesn't feel like a perfectly smoothed, finished form. And I like that. It helps me kind of treat it like a sketch, and it helps me just work quickly and loosely and sort of rough in ideas. So I'm going to rough in like a cheekbone here, the big masseter muscles of the jaw. Bring that jaw out and bring out that cylindrical form of the mandible and the mandible and the maxilla. That's the upper teeth and the lower jaw and the lower teeth. And start thinking about a nose here. And I want the eyes to be kind of wide set out here. So I'm just going to sort of sketch in where those eye sockets may end up being. And I'm just going to keep working around the form here using the Clay Tubes brush. Build up the top of the skull. Now, if I press down really hard, I can really build up with this brush. So I'm kind of giving it a light touch and moving around a lot as I go. Don't get stuck in any one particular area. It really is sort of sketching with clay. Press the P key to turn perspective on and off. And I will kind of look at something under perspective mode as well as under the standard kind of non-perspective window. And I just start to kind of pull out the things that I see in here that I like. Like I said, there's sort of happy accidents. It's one thing that sets sculpting in ZBrush apart from maybe modeling in Maya is that it is very much a sketch-based sculptural process. So you can think about, ideas while you're working. It's a lot easier to come in here and just sort of ideate, as opposed to approaching a model with topology, where it's not quite as easy, if even possible, to just sort of come up with it as you're going. So I'm going to go to B for brush, M for move, and press the V hotkey for the move brush, which is right there. And I'm going to just start shifting things around here. I want to bring that jaw down a little bit and bring it forward. And this is a nice time to mention that we have this thumbnail view over here in the upper left-hand corner. That allows you to see and judge the silhouette of what you're working on. So I can look at this, and it's not distracting me with any of the internal details. I'm seeing just the silhouette or the first read. So I can start to break up that profile, and I can judge that just in this black and white view, and it can be really, really useful. So I just want to bring that barrel of the mouth forward a little bit, bring that angle of the jaw back a little bit. And I want to adjust the shapes here. This is kind of sloping back a bit more than I want it to. So I like what's happening down here. So I'm just going to hold down the control key and use my masking brush to mask out this whole area here. If I want to mask straight through, if I just control, click, and drag on the background, I can drag a marquee, and that just masks everything underneath that. Control click on the background will invert the mask, and then if I zoom out by Alt clicking on the background and then letting go of Alt and dragging my brush, I can zoom that out, and then my move brush will help me move this entire section forward a bit. And because of that mask, I'm getting this really interesting sort of shape here between the brow and the nose. So I'm going to let that live. I'm going to let that stay. Bring all this forward. I want it to have this nice sort of hulking, heavy brow. And I want to make sure that those eye sockets do stay wide set and a bit on the sides of the head. We'll bring the zygomatic bone, zygomatic arch, and zygomatic process out a little bit. And I'm going to switch back to my clay tubes brush. B, C, and T. It's the hotkey sequence for that. And then we'll just bring these down. Anytime I'm sculpting, I'm trying to think about what the skeletal and muscular structure is underneath what I'm doing. And you don't have to, know every anatomical detail, just as long as you've got kind of a clear picture of how a skull works. You can think, well, if I have a cheekbone here, then I have to have a zygomatic arch, zygomatic process. I have to have some kind of structure here for the maxilla. That's the upper jaw, so to speak. It's where the teeth that are attached to the skull. And I know that is cylindrical, so that can help guide what I sculpt. So I'm thinking about these big brow shapes here, and just using still that clay tubes brush. Control, click, and drag on the background will clear the mask, and then if I hold down the shift key, I have my smooth brush. So I can just do a little bit of smoothing here. Now, when I'm sculpting, I really like to be gestural and quick and sketchy. So the smooth brush is really strong by default. You see, it obliterates things. So what I will do is I will press the shift key. That activates the smooth brush. So watch my Z intensity here. When I press the shift key, the Z intensity changes. That's because the Z intensity is different for the smooth brush than for the clay tubes brush when I let go of shift. So if I press shift and then turn my Z intensity down, now I've got a much more subtle smooth brush, and this is much more suited to the way I like to work. I think a lot of times when people start using ZBrush, they leave their brushes kind of at their default intensity, and I don't think that's conducive to getting good form, because I like to sneak up on form. I like to do what I call sneaking up on form, and sneaking up on colors is building things up stroke by stroke. I don't try and get anything in the first stroke. I like to build my way up to it, and that leads to sort of a live surface, like I was saying, where you've got noise and marks on the surface that you can end up turning into something really cool. That's just sketching. I'm going to switch to the Dam Standard brush. B for brush, D for Dam. Dam Standard is here. It's the S hotkey. And I'm just going to sketch in some forehead wrinkles here. Now, these are symmetrical, and I will break symmetry later because you don't want faces to be perfectly symmetrical, but just for the speed of working, I'm going to leave that symmetry on right now and just sort of sketch these things in here. There we go. And I'm going to start suggesting where a mouth will be, about there. So at this stage, I am ready to Dynamesh. So Dynamesh is different from a subdivision model like this. With a subdivision model, I can step up and down my subdivisions. I can go to level 1, which is very, very low res. And then if I press the D key, I can step up to a higher subdivision level, as you see here. Now, if you work with a subdivision model, you are pretty much limited to the volume of your original mesh. So this sphere is going to limit how much I can push and pull. At some point, I'll run out of geometry. However, Dynamesh is dynamic subdivisions or dynamic meshing. What that means is that as I sculpt, I can dynamically remesh the model to represent the volume that I'm trying to accomplish. So for example, if I wanted to pull a neck out of this, which I definitely do, I never like a design that's just a head floating in space. It just feels decapitated. It's weird to look at. So I'm going to hold down the Control key to get my masking brush. I'm going to mask out where the neck would grow from, so to speak. And then I will Control click on the background to invert that mask. Zoom out, and I will take my move brush, turn my draw size up, and then pull the neck down. And if I go into frame mode, you can see it's stretching all those faces. Now, I could not stretch this much further than this without running into problems. I would have to keep subdividing to get detail there. And eventually, I would just get to the point the mesh was too dense, or I just could not stretch it any further. So this is where Dynamesh comes into play. So if I turn off frame mode, you see that I've got a mask on here. So I need to clear that mask. I will go to Tool, Geometry, Dynamesh, make sure I'm at my highest subdivision level, and I want to change my resolution. 128 might be okay. I'll test it by clicking Dynamesh. And because I have subdivisions, it says this mesh has multiple subdivision levels. Always say no. What this is doing is it wants to freeze those subdivision levels, so when you unfreeze them, you can recapture all your subdivs. Problem is, it doesn't really work the way you might expect, and I will show you at the end of this a much, much better way to accomplish the same thing. So I'm going to say no, and that deletes my subdivision levels, and now I'm Dynameshed. And that's actually a decent subdivision, or a decent resolution for my first Dynamesh. If I go into frame mode now, you can see what that looks like. If I undo it, that's what it looks like before. If I redo it, you see what it's basically done is it's sliced everything up into all these evenly spaced quads and just blanketed that whole mesh, just like so. So I'll turn frame mode off. And this is the way Dynamesh works. If I mask out the shoulders here, Control click on the background to invert that mask, and then take the move brush and we'll stretch the chest out and down like this. Okay, go into frame mode. You see that's stretching out. Now watch what happens. If I Control click and drag once while I have a mask on the surface, that clears the mask. So Control click and drag is a way of clearing your masking. If you're in Dynamesh mode and you Control click and drag and there is no mask, it Dynameshes. You see it just rebuilt those stretched faces. So it's really great because you can just interactively and very, very quickly go through here and sketch, create new forms, add new shapes, and then dynamically remesh it with Dynamesh. Now, the drawback to Dynamesh is that you don't have your subdivision levels, and that's one thing that's made it hard to teach ZBrush ever since Dynamesh was created. I was talking to one of the trainers at Pixelogic about this years ago. It's like we both love Dynamesh, but it has made it a little bit harder to teach ZBrush because you absolutely want to learn how to sculpt with subdivision levels, and you want to finish your models with subdivision levels because that allows you a degree of control over subtlety and making big shape changes. With Dynamesh, you're always going to be dealing with several thousand polys. Like there's no subdivision levels anymore. Dynamesh doesn't support subdivision levels. So that means I can't step down to a lower level and start making big shape changes that propagate back up the chain. The reason for that's hard to explain if you've never sculpted in ZBrush before, but trust me, it's really important. You can't ever get a degree of subtlety of form if you can't move between subdivisions. So because of that, I'm going to show you how to take a Dynamesh model like this and do what I call bouncing it back into a subdivision mesh. Basically, we can sketch or ideate in Dynamesh and then bounce it back into a subdivision level once we've established our volumes. When it comes to determining your resolution, the ideal resolution for your Dynamesh, it's just like subdivision levels. You always want to have just enough geometry here to get the shapes you're trying to make. So at the beginning, that 128 is fine, but this is actually dependent on object scale. So you might find if you import a model into ZBrush and it's quite large, this value might need to be higher. But as a general rule, I always just try and get something that's about 300, 200,000 faces, something like this to start with. And then as I keep building it out and adding more protrusions, more limbs, I might need to increase that resolution. So I always treat Dynamesh as a way of generating shapes. And I say once my shapes are there, once I know that I'm not going to add any new appendages or change any major forms, then I'll leave Dynamesh mode and I'll start sculpting with subdivision levels. But right now, we're just concerned with learning how to sculpt with Dynamesh. So here I'm just roughing in some chest muscles. Bringing the sternocleidomastoid muscle down here, attaching that up there behind the ear. And I'll come over here in the underside and then build out the muscles that attach from the trachea to the underside of the jaw, or the backside of the mandible, I should say. And then I'm going to switch back to my move brush. And then just from the side view here, I'm going to pull these down a little bit. And I can see in my silhouette view there, those changes reflecting in the profile. Right there. So we'll bring this little bit of the jaw down. And then bring that out. Turn my draw size up on my move brush and just shift those muscles of the neck back. And there we go. Now I'll go back to my clay tubes brush and I'll start bringing those muscles, the shoulders, that's the trapezius muscle. Bring that out and around this way, attaching to shoulders which aren't there yet, but I'll show you in just a moment how we add those. I just want to do a little bit more sketching here. So I'm seeing these really nice little happy accidents here. I'll take my damn standard brush. I'm just going to cut out a little negative space there. And I like the idea of there being like a central aperture in the nose there. Maybe there'll be another couple little nostrils here. And again, I'm going to just sketch in where the mouth will be, but it doesn't have to be terribly resolved just yet. It's just sketching right now. Get the corners of the mouth there, and I'll take my clay tubes brush again. Now this time, I've blocked in most of my major shapes, so I'm going to click the alpha and turn the alpha off on my clay tubes brush. I will take the focal shift, which is this slider here, and turn it down, and that gives me a greater fall off in the brush. So now I can just build up what are called the nodes of the lips. It's this little donut shape in the corners of the mouth, and it's a nice sort of visual landmark there. It's an anatomical sort of reality. You get that at the corners of the mouth, because what's happening here that creates that little donut shape is you get the zygomaticus major and minor, which are these two triangular muscles that attach to the cheekbone. You have the buccinator, which comes here from the angle of the mandible. And then you've got the depressor anguli oris muscle here, as well as a few other facial expression muscles. They're all grabbing that central point. It's the corner of the orbicularis oris muscle here. So that creates this little pucker there at the corners of the mouth. So it's a really good visual landmark to establish. So I'll take my clay tubes brush again, sort of build this up. And at this stage, I don't want to get lost in any one particular detail. I just want to keep working my way around. There we go. Now, I want to start adding shoulders on here. So because I'm using Dynamesh, I can use the insert multi-mesh brushes. So if I go to B for brush, I for insert, we have all the brushes that start with IMM, and that's for insert multiple mesh. Now what I like to do is grab IMM primitives. All of these meshes up here can be inserted with this brush. It's just a bunch of primitives. I treat these like balls of clay. I'll just grab an insert sphere, click drag, and it draws two spheres because I have X symmetry turned on, and it masks the rest of the model. So that means I can take the move gizmo by pressing the W hotkey, and I can move these spheres around, and I'm just going to position them about where the shoulders would be, right here. And it has masked the rest of the geometry. So now if I switch back to, say, a move brush, I can start shaping these shoulders without worrying about affecting the rest of the model, which I want to pretty much keep intact. I just want to add these pieces on. So I'm going to pull the back of the sphere down and start to make the scapula, the shoulder blades. And I don't have to be anatomically perfect. I just want to get a general representation of the shape. There we go. Bring these out a little bit. Bring these down. And now I'm going to go into frame mode with Shift F. And you see that these spheres are a different resolution and a different color. That's the polygroup, just a color tag coding that allows you to easily separate and show or hide one bit of geometry from another. These are not the same mesh yet, and there's currently a mask on the head. So if I control click drag on the background once, that clears the mask. Control click and drag a second time, watch what happens. Oops, did I turn off my Dynamesh? I somehow got my Dynamesh turned off. Oh, that's fine. So what I'll do is just undo a few times. Let me see if I can't get back to my Dynamesh. There we go. Somehow I must have accidentally turned off my Dynamesh. So let's do that one more time. I'm just going to position these. Now, I'm using a touch screen. I'm using a Cintiq. So sometimes when I've got the touch screen enabled, my knuckle might accidentally hit something in the interface over here, which means that sometimes I just turn off my touch options on my Cintiq. So now, since Dynamesh is turned on, if I control click drag once, that clears the mask. Now that there's no mask, if I control click drag, because Dynamesh is turned on, it's going to glue those two parts together. Now these are the same mesh. It's retained the polygrouping, but it's merged into one object. So we'll turn the frame mode off. Now I'm just going to start smoothing this, and I can take my Clay Tubes brush one more time, and then just start to sculpt across these and sort of merge these together. So I'm going to think about the clavicle, the collarbone, which is a shape like this. From the front, it might look like a straight line, but it's not. It has a definite zigzag to it. There's 3/3. There's the first third, the second third, and the third third. So I want to get those sculpted in there. Those are really important to have to basically hang the rest of the muscles off of as we're working. So I'm going to look at this from the top and take my move brush and just sort of scoot this portion of the clavicle up and back. And then from the back view, I'll take my Clay Tubes brush again, and there's another little bony landmark here. Touches the clavicle, and then it comes straight back at an angle. That's called the angle or the spine of the scapula. That's that shoulder blade here. And that's going to be another nice little anatomical landmark to hang detail off of. So one of the things that happens here with that spine of the scapula, it's the bony landmark where the trapezius muscle here grabs on and comes up to the back of the skull. So I can go from there and just carry on that trapezius muscle. And I'll put a little bump there for the 7th cervical vertebrae. That's the last vertebrae of the neck. Put that there. And like I said, I never get stuck in one area too long. I just keep moving around. So we'll zoom out and take a look. So at this stage, I want to scale the body up so the head's a bit smaller, because if I have a smaller head, it's going to make everything feel a bit bigger in terms of like a big hulking sort of body. So I'm going to mask this out just by holding the control key and masking. So now I'm going to take the gizmo, W for gizmo, and if I hold down the Alt key, I can click the corners here and drag this up. And I'm going to turn off X symmetry and press the go to unmasked mesh center button there, and then hold down the Alt key so I can move the pivot without moving the object. So I'll put the pivot at the base of the skull right here. Now what I want to do is give the impression of a much larger body, so I'll just scale this up, and that's immediately going to start bringing this into more of the realm that I want it to be, kind of a big hulking kind of beastly creature. So now, of course, that's going to adjust where I need to place this from the side view. And then I'll just go back to my move brush and start to kind of like this little hanging bit of skin here. So we'll leave that there. Okay, there we go. So this brings us more into the neighborhood that I wanted to be in. I wanted to be more of a big hulking kind of creature. So I'm going to turn my focal shift down on my clay tubes brush with no alpha, hold down the Alt key, and that makes the clay tubes a subtraction brush. And you see what this does is it sort of planes these things down. So I need to make sure I've got my X symmetry on for that. So turn on X symmetry. So I've got dots on both sides, and I'll just hold down the Alt key and knock this back. There we go. And bring this back around here. And then use the clay tubes brush to fill in any of these recessed areas here. Building up the occipital, back of the skull. Bring this trapezius muscle down. And then building up the deltoid, the shoulder muscle here. That deltoid grabs onto the other side of that spine of the scapula that I was talking about. So that's that spine of the scapula there. And the deltoid muscle grabs the underside of it. And it wraps all the way around where the clavicle meets the spine of the scapula. That's called the acromion or the acromion process. That's the name of that bony landmark. And it's really important to know, not necessarily the name, it helps, but it's very important to know the shape, that those landmarks exist because they help you place the muscles, even on a fantasy creature. Because the best fantasy creatures are based in some kind of real-world anatomy. So having some idea of that sort of thing is going to be hugely beneficial for you. Being able to work out how things are going to fit together. So I'm going to take my standard brush, B for brush, S for standard, and then the T hotkey. Oops, B for brush, S for standard. It's the standard brush, I think, is actually changed. Standard is the G hotkey. That hotkey has changed on me, so I'm holding down the Alt key just to create a little hollow there. That's called the infraclavicular fossa. It's a little bony landmark. Well, it's not a bony landmark, it's a surface landmark because there is no muscle there. That's a hollow between the deltoid and the pectoralis. So I'm going to block those in, and now let's go ahead and start building out some more form here. I'm going to go to B for brush, I for insert, go back to that IMM primitives brush, and again, I'm just going to grab another sphere. I'm going to bring the two dots together, like this, click drag, and I want to make sure that I still have my Dynamesh turned on, so let's go back to Dynamesh. Yep. So that's inserted one sphere, because I brought the two dots together. Now I'm going to take my gizmo, go to the unmasked mesh center by clicking this button here and then pulling this over, scaling it up, scale it in X, and as you can probably imagine, I'm creating the big egg-shaped form of a rib cage here. I'm going to go back to my scale. I'm going to scale it in the Z-axis and rotate it because the rib cage sits at an angle. It's not like your torso isn't a pillar. Everything isn't organized, just one thing stacked on top of the other, which is a really common mistake. So remembering sort of the offsets between the masses is really helpful. I'm going to go back to my clay tubes brush, and I'm just going to etch away the thoracic arch here. Now, I can be really kind of broad, but also quite specific in the skeletal forms here because I'm just going to be filling these things out with other mesh inserts. So I can actually put the rib cage here pretty accurately in terms of its negative spaces because we're going to fill that out with another sphere later on for the abdomen. So I'm just going to smooth this back a bit, bring this up, make sure that everything is sitting where I want it to be sitting. And I want the chest to be a bit broad. But remember, there are muscles sitting on top of that. So I don't want the rib cage itself to be exactly the size that I want the torso to be ultimately. I want to leave some room to go in there and sculpt muscles on top of it. So there we go. Got the beginnings of a rib cage, and control click drag once clears the mask. Control click drag a second time executes Dynamesh. So if I go back into frame mode, you can see it's divided that up. It's also baked in the faceting, but just hitting it with the smooth brush takes care of that. And we're using the clay tubes brush on top of it, so it doesn't really matter. So now I'm going to take my clay tubes brush, and I want to get the pectoralis muscles, which are right here. They're coming over here and attaching to a humerus, the arm bone that's not there yet, but will be. So I'm just going to use these to sketch in those muscles. And I might, at this point, turn that alpha back on just to get a little bit of a more aggressive kind of brush, a noisy brush, as it were. So I'm just bringing these muscles forward. And now what you're going to see is that starts to create the front wall of the armpit. I'm going to take my standard brush and then push all this up inside, because this is where the arm's going to attach. So basically that's the inside of the armpit. And then we get this part here. Well, that's that scapula. It's the shoulder blade. And the muscles that attach to the shoulder blade. Those are the teres major and minor. They're these muscles that, and the infraspinatus. So there's basically this triangle of muscles right here on the scapula, and that forms the back wall of the armpit. So let's put an arm in there. So there's two ways we could do that. We could build an arm out of spheres, or we could go back to our IMM brush, and there is a brush here for IMMB parts, and this is just body parts. Now, don't think of this as cheating. This is kit bashing. This is just like photo bashing in Photoshop. It's taking existing pieces and combining them in new ways. There's a male arm, a female arm. Just grab it and then click drag, and you see it inserts that into the mesh. Now, they're obviously not the right size, but if I go to the gizmo again and then go to unmatched mesh center, I can center that on each one. And we can hold down the Alt key and change that pivot point. And bring this back down. And I will rotate these around the Y-axis, and I just want to position these more or less where they belong. It's a little bit humorous right now. Humorous, get it? It's a little humorous because they're too small. So we'll scale them up. That was a pun. I like puns. Puns are the height of humor. There we go. So now I'm going to take my move brush. So notice that it has masked everything else, which makes it very easy for me to take these arms and match them up pretty well. So push that in, and I just want to get that deltoid more or less lined up. The important thing is that the bicep is going up and hitting under the pectoralis muscle there. Might take the move brush or the move gizmo and move that over just a little bit. Now I can control click on the background and invert my mask if I want to adjust the Dynamesh portion of the model right now. Then control click again to invert my mask again. I could push that part in. I can also add to my mask. If I control click and drag, I can drag a marquee, and I've masked now part of the arms. So maybe I want to take my move gizmo. Let's position this down here inside the arm. And then if I hold down the Alt key, I can adjust the angle of the gizmo. So now if I were to take the move and move it down, I can stretch the proportion of those arms down a little bit. There we go. And maybe I want to mask out all of this. Mask this out. And I have not Dynameshed yet. I'm still in just a mesh insert right now. I'm still manipulating this before I glue it together, as it were. If I hold down the control key while I click and drag on scale, I can scale this up uniformly like that. If I scale it without holding down control, it does this. Now, either one of those might be fine, but I'd still have to move this back into position. I just wanted to enlarge the hands. I'd also like to just sort of fuse the fingers together. So what I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to clear my mask, but I'm not going to execute Dynamesh yet. Dynamesh has not been executed. These are still two separate objects. I'm going to mask out just these two fingers right here using the control click drag marquee. invert that mask. And then I'll just take the inflate brush and sort of inflate them so they are sort of merging together into one another. And I'll do the same thing for these other two fingers here. It's effectively going to create just a hand with basically two fingers. So let's inflate these and maybe make the fingertips really big. And maybe I will mask down to here and bring that transpose line. Oops, hold down the Alt key so I can move it. Bring this transpose gizmo, I mean to say, not the line. Bring this transpose gizmo over here. And I'm still holding down the Alt key so I can adjust the angle. Let go of Alt, and then I can stretch those fingers out like that. And with the inflate brush, I'm going to inflate from this side. Now, the reason I've done that is anything where the mesh is sort of interpenetrating itself, watch what happens when I Dynamesh. Control-click drag once, clears the mask. Control-click drag a second time, executes Dynamesh. And look at that. It glues those together. So now those are fused into a single object. And I kind of like this little negative space there. I'm going to take the inflate brush and build up the thumb. Build up these fingertips. And then zoom out. I'm going to take my clay tubes brush and I want to make sure that the forearm fits with the hand. I'm just going to build this up a little bit, trying to maintain my bony landmarks here. There's the elbow. So I'm going to make sure that I don't kind of go off from where the anatomy should be here. Use my smooth brush to sort of smooth that back a little bit. I'm going to build up the flexors, or excuse me, the extensors of the forearm here, coming down to that hand. And the flexors are under here. I'm just going to build those up. And again, don't get too lost in any of the details yet, even being too specific with anatomical structure. You don't need to put every single muscle in there. I just want to get the direction and the flow like this. These are the extensors that are coming around here. And remember, we have our elbow here. There's the elbow, and then there is a little bony landmark right here on your wrist. That's the only kind of wrist bone you can actually see on the surface. That's the lateral epicondyle of the ulna. And the important thing about that is that this right here is the olecranon process of the ulna, the technical term for your elbow. There is a straight line that goes between those two, more or less straight. And the reason I call that out is this is a really great way to sculpt forearms. If you know that line is there, that forms the dividing line between these muscles on the back of your forearm. Those are the extensor muscles that stretch your fingers out. And then on the other side of that, on the underside, you have your flexors. And they both butt right up against that bony landmark of that line. So it's just a nice way to keep your bearings as you're sculpting a forearm, is to just be aware of that portion, that little detail, and how it can help guide you where you put things. So I'm just going to sculpt this out. And I want to smooth that back a little bit. So just hit it with a smooth brush and let's fix that faceting there. There we go. So great. I'm going to go back to B for brush, I for insert. I'm going to go back to my IMM primitives, grab a sphere, and I'm going to insert a sphere there in the tummy area. W for move. Bring this back. And once again, we're just going to take the move brush and shift this into place. I think this would look interesting with kind of a little belly. So we'll put this little belly there. And if I go into frame mode, you'll notice that everything's been polygrouped automatically. Everything that was added separately has gotten its own polygroup. So I'm going to hide the arms just by Control-Shift-clicking on each polygroup to hide them. If I turn off frame mode now, it just makes it easier for me to see what I'm doing if I don't have to look through the arms to see it. So I'm just sort of creating the central pillar of the body here. I like the idea of that, like I said, having a little pot belly. Now I am going to Control, click, and drag twice to execute Dynamesh, and that will glue those together. So let's, oops, I need to make sure I show everything again. Control, Shift, click on the background, and then clear the mask, execute Dynamesh. Now that's glued together. So let's go ahead and hide those arms again. And go to B for brush, I for insert. We'll grab that primitive brush again. And I'm going to insert 2 spheres here for the hips and use the transpose gizmo to bring them together like this. So I'm going to take these and bring them together, and that's going to give us a gluteal fold. It's going to start creating kind of a buttocks there. We'll take the move brush, scooch these in, and we're going to start to create the pelvis. That's the iliac crest here. So basically I'm just sculpting the surface landmarks of the hips. And I just want to bring these forward a bit so I can see them on the surface, because that's generally a surface landmark, depending on like the body fat percentage of the person and their physique. But I think this creature, it would be nice to see that. So I'm going to zoom out and take a look at what we've got here. And I think that those could get larger. So I'm going to center that pivot and scale that up a bit, bring that down. There we go. Now I'm going to invert my mask, and I'm going to bring this down with the move brush. And that's going to be attaching to the pubic bone, which is the front of the pelvis right there. And then I'm going to take the inflate brush, and I have not Dynameshed yet. I'm still pre-Dynamesh. I'm going to inflate out the lateral oblique. Get this little bit of fat that rolls right up against that hip there. Make sure I haven't made those too wide. I'm going to clear the mask. Not clearing the mask twice, though. I haven't Dynameshed this yet. I just want to adjust this before I bring it all together. Bring that back so it's not quite so overstated. And then I'll execute Dynamesh. We go back into frame mode. You can see. Go. Let's execute Dynamesh. I forgot that I needed to show my arms again. Now I am able to Dynamesh. So let's undo that. Show all. And Dynamesh. And now that's glued together. So I'm going to take the smooth brush, smooth this back. I'm going to hide those arms again. And I'm going to take my clay tubes brush, and I just want to sculpt across the transition between these shapes. So I want to basically do what George Bridgman, who wrote amazing books on drawing the figure, he calls it wedging, where each form of the body sort of wedges into the one above and below it. So I want to get the lateral obliques here to wedge or flow up into the torso, like this. And then I'll take the smooth brush and knock a bit of this back. Knock a bit of this back. And while I'm over here, I'm just going to take the Dam Standard brush and just sketch a few little lines here. Those will be the serratus muscles at one point. And I'm just going to suggest ribs here. I don't have to be really specific. I'm just being sketchy. There we go. And build up that pectoralis muscle. Let's get this fixed up a little bit. Bring this down here. And the abdominal muscles here. Now there's a bit of like tummy fat here, so I'm going to let those not be quite so defined as maybe they would be if this creature were more muscular, or not muscular, had less body fat in its central body. There we go. So now we show the arms again. It's starting to kind of come together. So let's transition down here into the shoulders. I'll take that clay tubes brush and let's bring that deltoid down. So I'm just sculpting across that transition. That deltoid comes around here. The deltoid kind of looks like a comma or an apostrophe. It's got this curve here when it grabs onto the humerus bone. And then back here we'd have the tricep muscle, which fills out this negative space here. And now I can go ahead and hide the body instead of the arms, and that'll help me get the space to sculpt that. And it also lets me get into the underside of the arm here. So I'm going to sketch in where the coracobrachialis would be right here. And I don't have to be really, really specific. I just want to make marks for where these things belong and then refine the surface as I go along. I don't want to try and get every muscle perfect right out of the gate, because it will take forever and it won't look right. If you sculpt like the body piece by piece instead of sculpting it as a whole, it's going to be disappointing. It's not going to work because you have to bring everything up kind of at the same time for it all to be sort of unified shapes. I'll take my move brush here and I'm just going to pull this out a little bit. There we go. I like that big, thick wrist there. All right. And let's zoom in, take our move brush, bring this in a little bit. All right. And I'll go back to B for brush, I for insert. We'll go to our primitives, and I'm just going to insert a couple spheres here at the hips to be the legs. So I'll take the transpose gizmo, center that, bring it down here, and I'm basically just going to stretch these out along the y-axis and then rotate them. Bring them to about here. And then I'll take my move brush, and there's muscles that come over, make sure I'm on the move brush. There's muscles that come over here and grab onto that pubic bone. Those are called the adductor muscles of the thigh. They pull the legs towards the center. So you can remember it by adding, they sort of add to the volume of the body. And I'll use the move brush just to shape these legs. Bring this up to here. Bring that here. And I'm just going to Control-Shift-Click to hide those arms again so I can see what I'm doing here. Take my clay tubes brush and hold down the Alt key, and that lets me sort of sculpt in a plane. It sort of flattens as it subtracts, so it just helps me get a better shape here. Bring that down, and I'll take my move brush, and that will be where the knee will be eventually. So bring that up to there. Show everything again. Control, click, drag once to clear the mask. Control, click, drag a second time. And that will Dynamesh and glue everything together. So let's go ahead and smooth this back. And let's come back up here to the chest. Take my clay tubes brush, and I just want to carry these muscles of the neck out towards the chin. Take my move brush, and let's pull the corners of the mouth back a little bit and down. And now let's add some eyes in here. So we're going to use a subtool to add eyes. So subtools are basically just a way of grouping multiple Z tools together. So if we go to the light box and look at the tool menu, here we have the Demo Soldier. The Demo Soldier has multiple subtools right here. These are all just his little pieces and parts that are kitted together. It allows you to rotate and move around and then move between subtools and sculpt on those individual parts. So if we go back to our guy here, we want to put some spheres in here for eyeballs. So to add a subtool, it has to be loaded into the tool menu here. So if I'm just going to do some spheres, I'll just go to the light box, tools, and just open up a new sphere. It looks like it's replaced the creature, but it hasn't. It's just added it to the active tool. So if I go back to my creature, there's the sphere that I want. I'm going to go to Append and select Polysphere. Click that so it's the active subtool. And if you turn on transparency, you should be able to see that the sphere is actually sitting inside the head. I'll just hit the W key for the gizmo, move that off to the side. We'll scale this down to about the right size to the eyeball. From the side view, I will position it. From the front view, I will position it and bring this over. And then scale this down. Bring that forward. There we go. Now I'm going to Alt-click on the body, and then that changes my subtool selection. If I Alt-click on the eyeball, now that's the active subtool. I'll click on the body, now the body is. You could also just click directly here in the tool menu and select them. I'll turn on transparency so I can see through the eye subtool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask out all the faces inside the eye socket. Control-click on the background to invert that mask, and then take the clay tubes brush, and I'm going to build out those faces so they're sitting in front of that sphere, like this. I'll clear my mask, just build all this out, and then Control-click drag to Dynamesh. Now I will take the masking brush by holding down the Control key, and I'm going to mask out the shape of an open eye like this. Control click on the background to invert the mask. I'm going to turn transparency off. Now, if I take the move brush, hold down the Alt key, and then click and drag, I can push those faces in, revealing that eye. Control click drag on the background to clear my mask. And then I'm just going to take these faces and just smooth them around so it's conforming around that sphere. So it's like there is actually eyelids there. Like there are actually eyelids there, I should say. There we go. And I'll take the standard brush and just sort of build out this upper lid. Take the move brush, pull this down. Take the damn standard brush, carve back a little line there. Go back to my move brush. Adjust these shapes a little bit. Let's smooth this. Bring that up. And then I will control click and drag to execute Dynamesh. Now, I've only got one eye in there now. So obviously I want there to be two. So what I'm going to do is, let me press the space bar, turn my draw size down. I just want to smooth that a little bit. There we go. I'm going to alt click to select the eyeball. I will go to the Z plugin menu, which is here. Go to Subtool Master, and then I'll click Mirror. In the options, I'll merge into one subtool, and I'm going to mirror across the X-axis. Click OK, and there we go.